Chapter 1, The CEO's Sanctuary Breached. The glass and steel monolith of West Enterprises didn't just house a company, it served as a monument to Ryan West's absolute control. Inside his 50th floor office, the air was filtered, chilled to exactly 68 degrees, and scrubbed of any biological trace. Ryan sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, his tailored charcoal suit acting as a second skin. He adjusted his cufflink, feeling the familiar, dull ache behind his eyes, the side effect of the high-grade alpha suppressants he downed every morning like clockwork. To the world, Ryan was the apex architect. To himself, he was a man holding a leashed monster at bay. He hated the musk of aggression, the heat of the knot, and the archaic expectation that he should rule by instinct. A sharp, rhythmic rapping at his door broke his concentration. It wasn't the hesitant tap of his former assistant. It was a challenge. "Enter," Ryan said, his voice a low, melodic baritone that usually made omegas tilt their necks in involuntary submission. The man who walked in didn't tilt his neck. He didn't even blink. Chad Smith was a blur of motion and sharp angles. He wore a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up to reveal lean, corded forearms, and trousers that looked built for movement, not just vanity. He carried a tablet and a single physical file folder like they were tactical gear. "Mr. West," Chad said, his voice crisp and devoid of the breathy deference Ryan was used to. "I'm Chad Smith. Your 9 a.m. is cancelled, your 10:30 is moved to lunch, and I've already told the floor manager that the scent diffusers in the lobby are giving the interns migraines. We're switching to unscented air by noon." Ryan froze. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. He searched for the telltale signs of an omega, the soft jawline, the scent of something floral or sweet. Instead, he met a pair of amber eyes that burned with a fierce, terrifying intelligence. Chad smelled like nothing. Just laundry detergent and the faint, metallic tang of the city. Neutralizing patches, Ryan realized. Heavy-duty ones. "Mr. Smith," Ryan said, leaning back, his alpha instincts giving a small, frustrated twitch deep in his chest. "I didn't authorize any changes to the lobby, nor did I approve a schedule shuffle." "You hired me to optimize your life, sir," Chad replied, walking toward the obsidian desk. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit, he simply leaned over the desk to set the file down. Spending 45 minutes with a vendor who has a failing supply chain isn't optimization. It's a waste of your time. I've sent them a list of requirements to meet before you'll see them again. Ryan felt a flare of heat in his blood, not anger, exactly, but a startling spark of friction. "I prefer to make those calls myself. I like to keep my hands on the wheel." "Then you're a micromanager, not a CEO," Chad countered smoothly. He stood straight, crossing his arms. "And if you wanted a yes man, you should have kept the last guy. He was very good at nodding while your stock price dipped in the fourth quarter." The silence that followed was heavy. Ryan felt his inner alpha stir, a low growl in his subconscious demanding he stand up and assert his height, his scent, his dominance over this insolent omega who dared to lecture him. Control it, Ryan thought, gripping the arms of his chair. He's just an employee. Don't let the biology win. "You're very bold for someone on their first hour of probation," Ryan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a physical weight in the room. Chad didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, entering Ryan's personal space, a zone usually reserved for those seeking protection or those about to be crushed. He leaned in, his face inches from Ryan's. "I'm not here to be your omega assistant, Mr. West," Chad whispered, his gaze dropping briefly to Ryan's throat before locking back onto his eyes. "I'm here to run this office. If you want someone to roll over for you, fire me now. But if you want to actually win this merger, pick up that file and read page 4. I found the leak." Chad turned on his heel and headed for the door. "Wait," Ryan called out, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way the suppressants couldn't muffle. "Where are you going?" "To move your desk," Chad said without looking back. "The lighting is terrible for your posture." I'll be back in 10 minutes with espresso. Black. No sugar. Because you look like you haven't slept since 2019. The door clicked shut. Ryan sat in the sudden silence of his sterile sanctuary, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the file. For the first time in years, the cold, predictable world of Ryan West felt like it was starting to burn. And for some reason, he didn't want to put the fire out. Chapter 2, Friction and High Stakes. The following week was not a transition, it was a siege. Ryan watched from his glass-walled office as Chad Smith dismantled the alpha-first culture of the executive suite with the precision of a master clockmaker. Chad didn't lead with his voice, he led with an exhausting, terrifying competence. He moved through the office like a live wire, quick, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. By Thursday, the friction between them had reached a fever pitch. "You're late," Ryan snapped, not looking up from his monitor as Chad entered the office. Ryan was leaning into his CEO persona today, radiating a cold, oppressive aura that usually made people apologize before they even knew what they'd done wrong. The elevator was slow. "I've already filed a maintenance request," Chad replied, dropping a stack of leather-bound reports onto Ryan's desk with a resounding thud. "And you're grumpy. Did you skip the suppressants this morning? Your scent is leaking through the vents. It smells like a thunderstorm in a charcoal factory." Ryan bristled, his fingers tightening on his stylus. He had lowered his dose, desperate to shake the brain fog that had been haunting him. "My biological chemistry is not your concern, Mr. Smith." "It is when it makes my eyes water," Chad shot back, pulling out a chair and sitting down without an invitation. He flipped open a report. "We have the board meeting for the Ari-Sun merger in 20 minutes. You're planning to go in there and roar until they sign, aren't you?" Ryan finally looked up, his blue eyes icy. "It's a hostile takeover, Chad. It requires strength. The Ari-Sun board is composed of old guard alphas. They don't respond to polite requests, they respond to the biggest predator in the room." Chad let out a short, dry laugh. He leaned forward, his amber eyes mocking. "They respond to predictability. They expect you to act like a beast, so they've already built a cage for you. They're going to stall, bait your temper, and wait for you to make an emotional lapse so they can claim you're unstable and hike the price." "And what is your brilliant alternative?" Ryan asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me lead the first 15 minutes, Chad said coolly. Ryan stared at him. The sheer audacity was staggering. An Omega assistant leading a merger meeting with the most patriarchal board in the city? Absolutely not. You'd be eaten alive. "I'm an Omega, Ryan, not a snack," Chad said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that sent a sudden, unwanted jolt of heat down Ryan's spine. "Trust me. Or don't. But if you walk in there swinging your status around, you'll lose $10 million by lunch." The boardroom was a cavern of mahogany and ego. 6 alphas sat on the Ari-Sun side, their scents, heavy musks, tobacco, and bitter wood, clashing in a silent war for dominance. When Ryan walked in, the room tensed, the air thick with the invisible pressure of their collective alpha voice. Ryan took his seat at the head of the table, his face a mask of stone. Chad sat just behind him and to the right, looking deceptively small. West, the lead Ari-Sun director, a silver-haired man named Harrison, grunted. "I see you brought a secretary to a man's negotiation." Ryan felt his jaw clench. His inner alpha clawed at his throat, desperate to snarlingly defend his territory, and his assistant. But before he could speak, he felt a firm, warm hand settle briefly on his shoulder. It was a grounding touch, a silent command. "Mr. Harrison," Chad spoke up, his voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a blade. He didn't stand, he simply leaned back, looking bored. "I'm the chief of operations for this merger. If you want to talk about men's negotiations, we can wait for you to find someone who actually understands the 40% deficit in your manufacturing wing. Or, you can talk to me. The room went silent. Harrison's face turned a mottled purple. How dare you speak? I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing your offshore accounts, Chad interrupted, sliding a sheet of paper across the table. He didn't use a cent, he used facts. You're bleeding cash. You don't need an alpha to roar at you. You need a lifeline. And Mr. West is the only one offering it. Ryan watched, mesmerized. Chad was fierce. He wasn't fighting like an alpha, trying to crush them with presence, he was fighting like a duelist, finding every chink in their armor and twisting the blade. Throughout the hour, whenever Harrison tried to intimidate Chad, Chad simply tilted his head, a ghost of a smirk on his lips, and threw another devastating statistic at them. He was untouchable. When the meeting adjourned for a break, the Arisan team scrambled out, looking frazzled and defeated. Ryan stood up, his heart racing. He turned to Chad, who was calmly stacking his papers. The delicious tension Ryan had been trying to suppress for a week suddenly surged. He felt a desperate, primal urge to grab Chad's shoulders, not to push him away, but to pull him closer. That was. Ryan started, his voice thick. Effective? Chad suggested, finally looking up. His amber eyes were glowing with the thrill of the hunt. He looked alive, vibrant, and utterly independent. Terrifying, Ryan corrected, stepping into Chad's space. The sterile office air felt like it was humming with electricity. You took them apart. I told you, Chad whispered, his gaze dropping to Ryan's mouth for a split second before he recovered his professional mask. I don't roll over. Ryan felt his carefully constructed walls groan under the pressure. He was the CEO. He was in control. But as he looked at Chad, he realized he was becoming a passenger in his own life, and for the first time, he didn't mind the ride. Chapter 3, The Scent of Truth. The following Tuesday, the weather in the city was a sweltering, humid wait, but inside the West Enterprise's executive floor, the atmosphere was even heavier. Ryan was hunched over a spread of digital blueprints for the international summit. Beside him, Chad was a whirlwind of focused energy, cross-referencing shipping manifests. They had been working for 12 hours straight. The sterile air Ryan usually insisted upon had become stagnant. Then, with a dying metallic groan, the HVAC system shuddered and fell silent. Tell me that wasn't the cooling unit, Ryan muttered, pulling at his tie. Within minutes, the glass-walled office began to transform into a greenhouse. Main compressor is blown, Chad said, checking his tablet. Maintenance says it'll be 3 hours. We should call it a night. We can't, Ryan snapped, though the edge in his voice was fueled by a sudden, rising anxiety. If these filings aren't ready by dawn, the London branch will lose the bidding window. As the temperature climbed to 85 degrees, the physical reality of their biology began to bypass their defenses. Ryan felt the suppressants in his system struggling. Sweat pooled at the base of his neck, and his alpha scent, usually locked behind a chemical dam, began to seep out. It was a dark, heavy aroma, petrichor and scorched earth. Across the table, Chad was visibly faltering. The heat was melting the adhesive on his neutralizing patches. He reached up to press a hand against the back of his neck, trying to keep the strips in place, but it was a losing battle. Mr. Smith, Chad. You're leaking, Ryan said, his voice dropping into a raspy, primal register he didn't recognize. I'm fine, Chad hissed, though his cheeks were flushed a deep, dusty pink. A corner of the patch behind Chad's ear curled and fell away. The scent hit Ryan like a physical blow. It wasn't the cloying, sugary sweetness he had been taught to expect from omegas. It was wild. It smelled like rain hitting hot pavement and the sharp, bright zing of crushed citrus. It was electric. It was defiant. Mine, his inner alpha whispered, a thought so sudden and violent it made Ryan's lungs seize. Ryan shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. Get out, he groaned, shielding his eyes with his hand. Chad, go home. Now. What? No. We have to finish. I said leave. Ryan roared. His alpha voice, usually a tool he kept under iron lock and key, vibrated through the small office, demanding obedience. Chad froze. For a second, his pupils dilated, his body reacting to the biological command of a dominant alpha. But then, his jaw set. His eyes flashed with a fierce, molten amber light. He didn't flee. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from Ryan. "Don't you use that voice on me," Chad whispered, his voice trembling not with fear, but with a matching intensity. "I am not one of your board members, and I am not a dog you can whistle away because you're scared of a little pheromone. I am trying to protect you." Ryan snarled, his eyes turning a predatory, darkened blue. He grabbed the edge of the obsidian desk so hard the stone felt like it might crack. "If I lose control, if the suppressants fail completely, I won't be the man you work for. I'll be a monster. You think I'm that fragile?" Chad stepped even closer, invading the space where the scent of rain and citrus was overwhelming. He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from Ryan's trembling hand. "You've spent your whole life hating what you are because you think it means you're a predator. But look at you, Ryan. You're vibrating with the urge to take, and yet you're screaming at me to run. That's not a monster. That's a man with a soul." Ryan looked up, his breath coming in jagged hitches. The professional barrier hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. He could see the pulse jumping in Chad's throat, could feel the heat radiating off him. "You smell incredible," Ryan confessed, the words a low, broken growl. "It's driving me out of my mind." "Then be out of your mind for a minute," Chad challenged, his voice softening but losing none of its bite. "Stop fighting the world, Ryan. Just for tonight." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch, charged with the ozone of Chad's scent and the heavy gravity of Ryan's. Ryan reached out, his fingers finally brushing the heated skin of Chad's forearm. It wasn't an act of dominance. It was a plea for connection. Outside, the city lights flickered, but inside the sweltering office, the only thing that existed was the two of them, finally seeing the truth behind the masks. Chapter 4, Vulnerability as a Weapon. The morning after the scent incident didn't bring the usual cold clarity Ryan expected. Instead, it brought a private jet at 35,000 feet, heading toward the Zurich summit. The cabin of the Gulfstream was a masterpiece of cream leather and polished walnut, but to Ryan, it felt like a pressurized cage. The air recycler was working perfectly now, but his memory was plagued by the phantom scent of rain and citrus. Across the aisle, Chad sat with his laptop open, his expression a mask of professional neutrality. New patches were firmly in place behind his ears, yet the air between them hummed like a live wire. "He's waiting for me to apologize," Ryan thought, staring out at the blanket of clouds. "Or to pretend it didn't happen." "The briefing for the Swiss delegates is on your tablet," Chad said, his voice steady, though he didn't look up. "I've highlighted the points where they'll try to leverage the alpha hierarchy to bypass the financial transparency clauses." Ryan didn't pick up the tablet. "Chad. About the office. I shouldn't have used the command on you." It was an instinctual lapse. Chad finally looked up. His amber eyes weren't cold, they were weary. "I told you that night, Ryan, I'm not interested in your apologies for being an alpha. I'm interested in why you're so terrified of it. You've spent 3 hours staring at the window like you're afraid the clouds are going to judge you." Ryan let out a harsh, self-deprecating breath. "In my world, instinct is just a polite word for aggression. My father used his status to break people. My brothers use theirs to hunt. I built this company to prove that logic could override biology. But then you walk into a room, and all the logic in the world feels like a thin sheet of glass." Chad closed his laptop with a soft click. He unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to the seat directly across from Ryan, leaning forward into his space. "You think being an Omega is any different?" Chad asked softly. Everyone thinks I'm a prize to be won or a liability to be managed. They expect me to be soft. To be nurturing. When I'm sharp, they call me broken. When I'm independent, they call me unclaimed. Chad reached out, picking up a pen from the console and twirling it between his fingers, a nervous habit Ryan hadn't noticed before. We're both fighting a script we didn't write, Ryan. But you're so busy fighting yourself that you're missing the fact that you're the first alpha I've ever met who actually cares if I'm uncomfortable. Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out, his hand hovering over the console between them. I don't want to be your alpha, Chad. I don't want to own you. But I find it increasingly difficult to remember that I'm your boss. Then stop being my boss for 5 minutes, Chad whispered. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a sudden jolt that rattled the crystal glasses on the side table. Ryan instinctively reached out to steady Chad, his hand landing firmly on Chad's shoulder. The touch was electric. Through the thin fabric of Chad's shirt, Ryan could feel the heat of his skin, a heat that shouldn't be there if he was on full suppressants. You're not taking yours either, are you? Ryan realized, his voice dropping. The suppressants. You've lowered the dose. Chad didn't pull away. He leaned into the touch, a small, defiant smile playing on his lips. They make the world gray, Ryan. And lately, I've wanted to see the colors. Even if it's dangerous. Ryan's thumb brushed the line of Chad's neck, just an inch from the scent patch. The delicious tension wasn't a metaphor anymore, it was a physical weight, a magnetic pull that made every inch of Ryan's body ache to close the gap. He saw Chad's pupils blow wide, his breath hitching in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. We have to be professional, Ryan murmured, even as he leaned closer, his forehead almost touching Chad's. The summit. The merger. The board. To hell with the board, Chad breathed, his fierce independence flaring even now. They aren't in this plane. It's just us. Ryan closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He could still smell the ozone, the citrus, the life of the man in front of him. He realized then that his carefully constructed walls weren't protecting him from the world, they were a prison keeping him from this. Chapter 5, The Breaking Point. The grand hall of the Darvois estate in Zurich was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen explosions from the gilded ceiling, and the air was a suffocating cocktail of expensive champagne and the aggressive, territorial musks of Europe's most powerful alphas. Ryan felt the familiar clawing at his throat. He had taken a half dose of suppressants, enough to keep his mind sharp, but not enough to kill the protective instinct that had been simmering since they touched down. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand, his eyes never leaving Chad. Chad was a revelation in a midnight blue velvet blazer. He moved through the crowd not like a subordinate, but like a predator among scavengers. He was laughing at a joke made by a German investor, his sharp wit cutting through the room's pretension. He's magnificent, Ryan thought, a surge of pride warring with a dark, possessive heat. And he's doing it all without hiding who he is. The peace didn't last. Victor Thorne, a rival CEO known for his traditionalist views, a man who believed omegas were property and alphas were kings, approached Chad. Thorne was a mountain of a man, radiating a thick, oily scent of charred oak that made the omegas in the vicinity bow their heads. Ryan began to move before he even realized he'd set his glass down. So, Thorne's voice boomed, dripping with a condescending sweetness. This is the little firebrand I've heard about. West's new pet. Chad didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his drink and looked Thorne up and down with devastating boredom. Actually, I'm his chief of operations. And you must be Thorne. I recognized you from your third-quarter earnings report. It was quite a tragedy. Or a comedy, depending on who owns the stock. Thorne's face darkened. He stepped into Chad's personal space, releasing a wave of domineering pheromones, a scent crush designed to force an omega to their knees. You have a sharp tongue for a creature that should be spending its time in a nest. Does West let you talk like this, or do you need to be taught where the floor is? Ryan was 5 feet away, his vision tunneling into a red haze. His inner alpha was screaming, a primal roar that demanded he tear Thorn's throat out. His hand curled into a fist, his muscles coiling to strike. Wait, a voice in his head whispered. Look at Chad. Chad wasn't trembling. He wasn't submitting. He was looking at Thorn with genuine pity. Mr. Thorn, Chad said, his voice crystal clear and utterly unafraid. You're trying to use biology to win an argument because you lack the intellect to win it with words. You smell like desperation and bad investments. If you touch me, I won't just file a suit, I'll buy your debt and liquidate your private collection by Monday morning. Now, move. You're blocking the breeze. Thorn gasped, stunned by the sheer defiance. He raised a hand as if to grab Chad's collar. In a flash, Ryan was there. He didn't punch Thorn. He didn't roar. He simply stepped between them, his presence an immovable wall of cold, lethal alpha energy. He didn't need to shout, the air around Ryan suddenly turned sub-zero. The gentleman asked you to move, Victor, Ryan said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the glassware on the nearby table rattle. And I would suggest you do it before I decide to stop being a businessman and start being exactly what you're afraid I am. Thorn looked into Ryan's eyes, darkened, predatory, and utterly focused, and saw a man who had spent a lifetime holding back a monster. Thorn blinked, his bravado vanishing, and backed away into the crowd without a word. The silence of the penthouse suite afterward was deafening. Ryan paced the length of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, agonizing hunger. He felt the leak, his scent was no longer a hint, it was a storm of petrichor and ancient earth, filling the room. Ryan, Chad said softly. He was standing by the door, his blazer discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. I almost killed him, Ryan rasped, turning around. His eyes were still glowing with a faint, unnatural blue. I felt the control slip. I wanted to break him for touching you. Is that what I am? Just another Thorn, hiding behind a suit. Chad walked toward him, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped right in front of Ryan, reaching up to cup Ryan's face with both hands. His palms were warm, grounding. No, Chad whispered. Thorn wants to dominate. You wanted to protect. There's a world of difference between a tyrant and a guardian, Ryan. Chad leaned in, pressing his forehead against Ryan's. The scent of rain and citrus was a beautiful, chaotic melody. I've spent my whole life being fierce because I was afraid that if I stopped, I'd be erased. But with you, I don't feel erased. I feel seen. I can't be gentle right now, Ryan warned, his hands gripping Chad's waist, pulling him flush against his body. The delicious tension snapped like a taut wire. Then don't be gentle, Chad breathed, his fingers sliding into Ryan's hair, pulling him down. Be real. Give me all of it. When Ryan finally kissed him, it wasn't a corporate negotiation or a careful play for power. It was a collision. It was the CEO losing total control and the assistant finding exactly where he belonged, not at Ryan's feet, but by his side, in the middle of the storm. Chapter 6, The Complication. The morning light in Zurich was a cruel, brilliant white, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Inside, the air was still heavy with the aftermath of the storm, the scent of ozone and scorched earth lingering in the silk sheets. Ryan woke with Chad's head on his chest, a heavy, grounding weight. For a few fleeting moments, the apex architect felt a peace he hadn't known since childhood. But the silence was shattered by the frantic, rhythmic buzzing of 2 phones on the nightstand. Ryan reached out, his hand brushing Chad's shoulder. The Omega stirred, blinking his amber eyes, his fierce expression softened by sleep. Don't answer it, Chad murmured, his voice husky. Whatever it is, it can wait. It's the emergency line from New York, Ryan said, his heart sinking as he glanced at the screen. The headline on the Global Financial Chronicle was a heat-seeking missile, the Hollow Alpha, leaked medical records reveal West Enterprises CEO relies on experimental suppressants to lead. Beneath it was a grainy photo of Ryan and Chad at the gala, captured in the moment Ryan had stepped between Chad and Thorne. The caption read, "Is the tech titan's legendary cool just a chemical mask?" Insiders suggest a scandalous lapse in control involving a low-level assistant. The peace in the room evaporated. "They have my pharmacy records," Ryan whispered, his face turning a ghostly pale. "And they're framing the gala incident not as a defense, but as an unstable alpha outburst." Chad sat up, the sheets falling to his waist. He grabbed his own phone, his eyes scanning the data. "It's a coordinated hit, Ryan. Look at the timing. This was uploaded 10 minutes after we left the gala. Someone was waiting for you to show even a hint of emotion." "The board is calling an emergency session in 3 hours," Ryan said, standing up and pacing the room. His inner alpha was no longer roaring, it was pacing a cage of shame. "They're going to use the morality clause. They'll say my reliance on drugs makes my decision-making suspect. They'll say I'm a liability." He turned to Chad, his eyes filled with a sudden, sharp pain. "They're calling you a distraction, Chad. A trigger for my instability. They're going to demand I fire you to prove I'm back in control." Chad stood up, his nakedness not a vulnerability but a badge of defiance. He walked over to Ryan, poking a finger hard into the CEO's chest. "Stop it. Stop playing their game. You're already mourning a funeral that hasn't happened yet." "You don't understand," Ryan rasped. "If I lose the company, I lose the only thing I've built that wasn't dictated by my secondary gender. And if I stay, they'll strip you of everything you've worked for to clean up the image." "Then let them try," Chad said, his voice like iron. "But I won't let you go back into that gray, suppressed fog just to please a bunch of old men who are afraid of a little honesty." The flight back to New York was a grueling 10 hours of silence and strategy. Ryan watched Chad work, typing furiously, making calls to his own network of invisible assistants and data brokers. Chad wasn't acting like a lover, he was acting like a general. When they landed, the lobby of West Enterprises was a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Inside the boardroom, the air was thick with the bitter, sour scent of anxious alphas. Ryan, Harrison, the silver-haired director, said as they entered. "Sit down. Alone. Mr. Smith can wait in the hall." "Mr. Smith is my chief of operations," Ryan said, his voice steady, though his pulse was drumming. "He stays. He is the reason your blood chemistry is all over the news." Harrison slammed a hand on the table. "You've gone soft, West. Or worse, you've gone feral. We can't have a CEO who might not on the boardroom floor because his assistant wore the wrong cologne." The insult was calculated. Ryan felt the heat rise, that familiar pull to growl, to dominate, to crush. But he looked at Chad, who was standing by the door, watching him with a calm, expectant gaze. Chad wasn't asking for protection, he was waiting for Ryan to be real. "I'm not going to fire him," Ryan said, his voice dropping the CEO mask entirely. "And I'm not going to increase my dosage." A collective gasp went around the room. "Then you're resigning," Harrison sneered. "No," Chad interrupted, stepping forward and sliding a tablet onto the center of the table. "He's not. Because while you were busy worrying about his pheromones, I spent the flight tracking the leak. The medical records were sold to the press by your shell company, Harrison." The room went cold. Ryan looked at the screen, a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading directly to the man sitting across from him. "This isn't about biology," Chad said, leaning over the table, his amber eyes flashing with a terrifying brilliance. "This is a coup. And if you try to oust Mr. West, I'll release the rest of this file, which includes your own suppressant habits and the 3 unclaimed omegas you've been paying off since 2022. Ryan looked at Chad, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He realized then that he didn't need to be the apex architect alone. "I'll give you a choice, Harrison," Ryan said, leaning back, finally comfortable in his own skin. "You retire today for health reasons. Or we see whose scent is the foulest when the public gets a hold of this." As Harrison sputtered and the board began to crumble, Chad caught Ryan's eye. A silent message passed between them: "The walls are down. Now, let's see what we can build." Chapter 7, A New Authority. The aftermath of the boardroom coup didn't result in the quiet, sterile peace Ryan had once craved. Instead, it was a vibrant, noisy revolution. 1 month later, the 50th floor of West Enterprises looked different. The obsidian desk was gone, replaced by a collaborative circular table made of warm oak. The air wasn't scrubbed of life anymore. The windows were often cracked open, letting in the salt-tinged breeze of the Hudson River. Ryan stood by the window, adjusting his watch. He wasn't wearing his charcoal armor today. He wore a soft navy sweater, the sleeves pushed up. He felt light. He hadn't touched a suppressant in 30 days. The transition had been a physical gauntlet, sweats, irritability, and a heightened sensory world, but he had survived it because of the man currently sitting on the edge of the oak table, eating a green apple. "You're brooding again," Chad said, the crunch of the apple punctuating his words. "I can smell the CEO contemplation musk from here. It's a bit heavy on the cedar today." Ryan turned, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. He walked over to Chad, stepping into the space that used to feel like a battlefield but now felt like home. He didn't use an alpha command. He didn't need to. He simply leaned his forehead against Chad's shoulder. "I'm thinking about the press conference," Ryan admitted. "The new era announcement. Are we sure about the merit-based restructuring? The shareholders are still twitching." "Let them twitch," Chad said, reaching up to run a hand through Ryan's hair, a gesture of intimacy that still made Ryan's heart skip a beat. "We've already seen the data. Productivity is up 15% since we removed the alpha-only requirement for senior management. People are working because they're talented, not because they're intimidated." Chad hopped off the table, his eyes glowing with that familiar, fierce amber light. "And besides, if they give you trouble, I'll just remind them that I'm the one who handles their cybersecurity." "You're a menace," Ryan whispered, catching Chad's hand and kissing the palm. "I'm an Omega who knows his worth," Chad corrected. "There's a difference." The lobby of West Enterprises was packed. Every major news outlet was present. This wasn't just a corporate update, it was a cultural tipping point. Ryan stepped onto the podium, but he didn't stand alone. Chad stood exactly 1/2 step to his left, not behind him, but beside him. Ryan looked into the cameras, his blue eyes clear and steady. "For 10 years, I ran this company behind a wall of chemicals," Ryan began, his voice amplified, echoing through the marble hall. "I was told that to be a leader, I had to be a predator. I was told that my biology was a cage, and that the only way to be civilized was to suppress who I was." He glanced at Chad, and for a second, the rest of the world vanished. "I was wrong," Ryan continued. "True leadership isn't about the absence of instinct, it's about the presence of partnership. We are announcing today that West Enterprises is dissolving the traditional gender-tiered hierarchy in our hiring and promotion processes. We are moving toward a dynamic equality model." The room erupted. Reporters scrambled, shouting questions about biological roles and natural order. One reporter, a sharp-featured alpha from a conservative rag, shouted over the din, "Mr. West, are you suggesting that an Omega is capable of holding the same authority as an alpha in a crisis? Isn't that unnatural?" Ryan didn't answer. He stepped back, gesturing to Chad. Chad stepped up to the microphone. He didn't look like a soft Omega. He looked like a storm in a tailored suit. In the last month, Chad said, his voice cutting through the noise like a diamond through glass, I have negotiated 3 international contracts, restructured our legal department, and prevented a hostile takeover while Mr. West was recovering from his chemical dependency. If you find that unnatural, then perhaps your definition of nature is simply too small. Chad leaned in, a smirk playing on his lips. And as for authority, I don't need a secondary gender to tell me I'm in charge. My track record does that for me. That evening, the office was empty. The city lights began to twinkle outside, a million tiny diamonds against the velvet sky. Ryan sat in one of the lounge chairs, watching Chad pack his bag. The reluctant alpha and the fierce assistant were gone, replaced by 2 men who had fought their way to a messy, beautiful truth. You were incredible today, Ryan said. Chad swung his bag over his shoulder and walked over, straddling Ryan's lap in the chair. He wrapped his arms around Ryan's neck, his scent, that intoxicating mix of rain and citrus, filling Ryan's senses. We were incredible, Chad corrected. He leaned down, his nose brushing against the scent gland on Ryan's neck, which was now pulsing with a warm, healthy pheromone of contentment. You didn't growl once. I'm almost disappointed. Ryan laughed, his hands settling on Chad's waist, feeling the solid, real weight of him. I save the growling for when we're alone. Good, Chad whispered, pulling Ryan into a kiss that tasted of freedom and the future. Because I've got a lot of ideas for the new era, Ryan. And none of them involve staying in this office tonight. As they left the building together, hand in hand, the glass and steel monolith no longer felt like a monument to control. It felt like a start. Ryan West had spent his life trying to be a man without a nature. He had ended up as something much better, a man with a heart, a partner with a soul, and an alpha who finally knew that the greatest strength wasn't in the command, but in the connection. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Westsmith shift, as the media had dubbed their corporate and cultural revolution, had moved past the stage of scandal and into the realm of legend. The executive floor was no longer a tomb of silence. It hummed with the sound of a diverse team. But inside the private residence of the CEO and his chief of operations, the world was much quieter. Ryan stood on the balcony of their new Brooklyn brownstone, a far cry from the cold glass penthouse of his past. The air here smelled of real things, jasmine from the neighbor's garden, the salt of the nearby river, and the charcoal grill from a block away. He felt a pair of arms wrap around his waist from behind. He didn't need to look to know it was Chad. The scent of rain and citrus was now a permanent, comforting part of his life, no longer something to be masked or feared. You're doing it again, Chad murmured against the small of Ryan's back. Doing what? Thinking about the quarterly earnings, Chad teased, sliding his hands up to rest on Ryan's chest. I can feel your heart rate accelerating. Relax, Ryan. We're up 22%. The unnatural experiment is a gold mine. Ryan turned in Chad's arms, pulling him close. The physical difference between them, Ryan's broad-shouldered alpha frame and Chad's leaner, agile omega build, no longer felt like a map of power. It just felt like 2 pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. I wasn't thinking about the earnings, Ryan said, his voice a low, warm rumble. He reached up, his thumb tracing a small, faint mark on the side of Chad's neck. It wasn't a traditional, claim mark, neither of them believed in the branding of another person, but it was a place where Ryan often rested his lips. I was thinking about the gala tonight. Ah, the anniversary of the night you almost threw Victor Thorne off a balcony, Chad laughed, his amber eyes dancing. Good times. I was thinking about how I don't have to take a pill to stand next to you anymore, Ryan said seriously. He looked down at his hands, they were steady. I spent so long terrified that if I let my nature out, I'd lose you, or I'd hurt you. But you took the monster by the hand and turned him into a man. Chad's expression softened. He reached up, pulling Ryan's head down until their foreheads touched. You were never a monster, Ryan. You were just a guy who needed an assistant brave enough to tell him he was being an idiot. And a fierce one at that, Ryan added. The fiercest, Chad agreed. A soft chime came from inside the house, a reminder for their car. Tonight, they would walk into the lion's den of high society again. But this time, they wouldn't be playing roles. There would be no neutralizing patches, no heavy suppressants, and no fake smiles. As they walked toward the door, Ryan paused, catching Chad's hand. He pulled him back for one more lingering kiss, one that tasted of citrus, rain, and a future they had built with their own 4 hands. Ready to go shake up the world again? Ryan asked. Chad smirked, adjusting Ryan's tie with a sharp, proprietary tug. Always. Just try to keep up, West. Ryan smiled, the reluctant alpha finally at peace, following his partner out into the light.